Welcome back. This week, a landmark ruling. The Supreme Court ruled that the Civil Rights Act of 1964 now also applies to discrimination based on sexual orientation and gender identity. This morning, we're joined by Dr. Jeanine Kraybill from Cal State Bakersfield to talk about what this ruling actually means. Good morning, Dr. Jeanine. Thank you for joining us this morning.
Thank you so much. It's a pleasure to be here.
Absolutely. So before Monday's ruling, something really interesting, because this wasn't the case in California, but it was legal in nearly half of states to fire workers for being gay. So does that kind of play into this decision? Was this unexpected from the Supreme Court at this time?
Well, you had about 29 states where you could be discriminated against in employment because of your sexual orientation, whether you were gay or transgender. To some, I think the Neil Gorsuch authoring the opinion and him and John Roberts siding with the more progressive wing of the court may be surprising, particularly too because in the 2015 same-sex marriage case, Chief Justice John Roberts dissented. So for some, this is, a surprise. I also, though, think that Neil Gorsuch being a Trump appointee was also a surprise for some. But when you take the time to read the opinion, he really feels that he put a textual perspective on reading Title VII of the Civil Rights Act of 1964 and really looking at what the law says about sex and what the law says about discrimination, and then rendering him and his colleagues' decision.
So this extends workplace protections to millions of people across the country who did not previously have them. Can you talk about exactly what this means for the LGBTQ community in the workplace?
Sure. This is a Supreme Court case for the LGBTQ plus community, because what it basically says is that in hiring practices and also in employment, you cannot discriminate on the basis of sexual orientation in terms of if someone is homosexual or if their status is that they are a transgender male or female. And so now those other states that had those policies on the books that allowed employers to discriminate, even private businesses like the funeral home, for example, that's no longer the case, that they would be in violation of federal law. And it was really a strong signal, particularly in the RG&GR funeral home case with Amy Stevens, a transgender female. What that family actually tried to also argue was this on religious grounds. And so it really is broad sweeping reform by the Supreme Court in terms of their interpretation of the Civil Rights Act of Title VII and extending those protections in workplace discrimination for the LGBTQ community. So it's both going to pertain to hiring practices, and then it'll also be pertaining to termination practices.
We're almost out of time, but I want to ask, is this going to change anything for California? Because California was a little bit more progressive than a lot of those other states in terms of this.
California is one of those states where when it comes to things like employment, when it comes to other things too, servicing in terms of public accommodations, it becomes very difficult to discriminate on the basis of sexual orientation. So California was one of those states that already had those protections afforded, but now it's just even backed more securely by a federal court order decision.
What else stands out to you about this new ruling? It's a historic ruling, really, on Monday.
So many things that I know that we don't have time for, but one of the things that stands out to me is, and this is to some degree a blow to the Trump administration, because putting Neil Gorsuch in the position in the during the 2016 election, then going into 2017, was this idea that he would really place Antonin Scalia because he too has a textualist interpretation. The other thing too that I think is important to note is that Chief Justice John Roberts joined the majority opinion, and he voted against the same-sex marriage case in 2015. I also think something to look ahead for is how is this ruling going to impact hundreds of pieces of federal laws and statutes that deal with discrimination when it comes to the LGBTQ plus community. So I think that this reform opens up a debate in a lot of areas and can be more sweeping.
Dr. Kraybill, thank you so much for joining us this morning. This was really insightful, a lot of new information for everybody to go through. So thank you for joining us.
Thank you for having me.
Absolutely. We'll have that interview on our website, turnto23.com. But this morning, spray parks in Bakersfield